The world we inhabit is a machine that never sleeps. It is a grinding gear of digital notifications, the relentless hum of high-speed highways, and the frantic, shallow pulse of 1,000 modern anxieties. We belong to a generation of the uprooted. We move constantly, shifting from city to city, screen to screen. Yet we often find ourselves belonging nowhere, drifting like dust in the wake of a passing car. But in the autumn of 2025, a different kind of movement began to take shape on the horizon. It didn't arrive with a shout or a flashy marketing campaign. It began with a collective, synchronized breath. 19 figures, draped in the ancient colors of burnt orange and sun-faded saffron, stepped onto the shimmering asphalt of Texas. They did not carry suitcases, GPS devices, or the heavy baggage of personal ambition, and they carried only a bowl, a robe, and a shared vow. This was the silent birth of the Walk for Peace. If you look closely at them, you will see that they do not walk as 19 individual men. To the trained eye, they move as a single, multi-limbed organism, a biological marvel. Imagine a grove of ancient trees that has somehow learned to walk, migrating through a desert of concrete and steel. Along the back roads of the South, people watched from their porch swings in a state of quiet confusion. Why walk when you can drive? Why stay silent when the world demands you scream your opinion? And more importantly, what was hidden in the lead monk's weathered alms bowl? It remained covered by a simple cloth, a silent weight he carried from the very first mile in Texas. It was a mystery, an open loop in the narrative of their journey, a secret that would remain unsealed until the sky turned white and the earth itself froze solid. Perhaps you are a skeptic. In a world of geopolitical strife and economic collapse, you might think that 19 men walking across a divided continent is nothing more than a symbolic gesture, a drop of water thrown into a raging forest fire. But stop for a moment. Look at your own hands. Look at the faces of the people in your neighborhood. We are living in a season of deep social fractures, a time of spiritual drought, where the topsoil of our shared humanity has turned to dry, infertile dust. This journey was never just a physical trek of 2,300 miles. It was a living laboratory for healing. It was a high-stakes test to see if peace is a destination we eventually reach, or if it is a muscle, a biological necessity, that we must exercise until it bleeds. If you have ever felt disconnected from your community, if you have ever felt like a fragile seedling trying to grow in the middle of a paved parking lot, this story is the botanical map you didn't know you were looking for. Texas in October is not a sanctuary. It is a brutal, unforgiving oven. The heat radiates off the blacktop in shimmering, hallucinatory waves, threatening to melt the very resolve of the group. These monks are not walking on air-cushioned soles or high-tech hiking boots. They walk barefoot or in the thinnest of sandals, their skin meeting the raw, jagged grit of the American South. To a botanist, they are a study in radical adaptation. In the wild, a lone tree standing in an open field during a storm is a target. It can be snapped by a single gust. Its roots can be torn from the dry, loose earth by the sheer force of the gale. But these 19 have a survival secret. Their roots are not buried in the shifting soil of Texas. Their roots are entwined, limb by limb, heart by heart, in the brother walking to their left and the brother to their right. They are an underground network of compassion, moving above ground. They move in a rhythmic, heavy silence that eventually deafens the roar of the passing semi-trucks. There is no idle chatter about the weather, no complaining about the blisters forming like angry welts on their heels, no discussion of the political news of the day. There is only the collective step. Thud. 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 A heartbeat on the pavement. When the midday sun beats down at 100 degrees, and the group does not splinter in search of individual shade. They lean into the shared shadow of their collective intent. They are proving a terrifyingly beautiful truth, that you can be technically homeless, yet perfectly at home, as long as you serve as the fertile soil for someone else's growth. They are the roots in the wind, proving that stability does not come from standing still, but from moving together. November 19th, 2025. Dayton, Texas. The air that morning was thick with the scent of pine needles and diesel exhaust. The collective was moving with its usual fluid grace, a golden thread stitching the ragged edge of the highway. Then, the silence was shattered. The screech of tires on hot pavement, the sickening crunch of metal against bone, and the heavy, dull impact of a truck. Bonte Dam, a vital, sturdy branch of this living entity, was struck down in an instant. In any other part of our modern world, this would be a moment of explosive chaos. There would be shouts of rage, the pointing of fingers at the trembling driver, the frantic, jagged energy of blame and litigation. But the 19 monks are not a crowd. They are a sangha, a forest. As Bonte Dam lay on the asphalt, his blood staining the road like a dark prayer, the group did not shatter into panic. They contracted. They breathed as one. There was no venomous rage directed at the man behind the wheel, only a profound, devastatingly quiet compassion. The collective was wounded, yes. It was as if a great oak had lost a massive, centuries-old limb in a freak storm. Yet the main trunk remained upright, anchored by the silent, unyielding prayers of the 18 who remained standing. They formed a circle of saffron, a biological barrier of peace against the sudden violence of the world. This was the first true test of healing. Not the clinical healing of a broken bone, but the spiritual healing of a moment that could have easily fermented into hate. They chose, in that moment of agony, to root even deeper into the grace of forgiveness. The journey pressed on, crossing the invisible cultural borders into the heart of the Bible Belt. Here, the noise of the world took a different, more complex form. It was the noise of curiosity, the static of suspicion, and the watchful, weary eyes of small-town America. How do you explain a silent forest of monks to a land built on loud sermons, neon signs, and the rugged gospel of the individual? You don't. You don't use words at all. You let the grafting happen naturally, the way a gardener joins two different species into one stronger plant. And the catalyst for this miraculous connection was four-legged and fur-covered. Aloka the peace dog. Aloka did not wear the saffron robes, but she carried the entire spirit of the 2,300-mile walk in every rhythmic wag of her tail. She became the emotional bridge, the translator between the monastic silence and the local porch fronts of Louisiana and Mississippi. When a skeptic looked at the monks, they saw the other, something foreign, something to be feared or judged. But when they saw Aloka walking with them, disciplined, calm, her eyes reflecting a strange, ancient light, the psychological barriers began to crumble. Farmers and shopkeepers would come to the roadside with jugs of water, not initially for the men, but for the dog. And in those brief, humid exchanges, a grafting occurred. A stranger would reach out to touch Aloka's head. Their eyes would briefly meet the eyes of a silent monk, and for a split second, the labels of stranger or foreigner vanished. They were simply two living things sharing the same air, the same humidity, the same heavy burden of being alive. Aloka the peace dog was the silent ambassador of the woods, proving that peace doesn't need a theology or a translator. It only needs a presence. By the time they reached the border of Alabama, they were no longer 19 strangers. They were a moving sanctuary, and the entire neighborhood was being invited to take shelter under their collective branches. By January 2026, the scorched, red earth of the South was a distant memory. The collective entered the Carolinas, and the sky turned a bruised, heavy shade of charcoal gray. Then, the snow began to fall. It didn't fall in soft, poetic flakes. It fell in relentless sheets, a white erasure of the world they had come to know. For a botanist, this is the dormant season, the time when life is tested to its absolute limit by the killing frost. But for the Walk for Peace, there was no such thing as dormancy. The visual impact was haunting. A thin, vibrant line of saffron robes cutting a path through a monochromatic world of blinding white. The monks' feet, which had once been toughened and tanned by the Texas heat, now turned a ghostly blue, numbed by the freezing slush that seeped into their sandals. Every single step became a grueling negotiation with physical pain. Their breath hung in the frozen air like ghost smoke. In the small towns of the Carolinas, locals watched from behind the safety of frosted windows, completely stunned. They saw a group of men who, by all logic, should have been seeking the warmth of a shelter, yet they continued to move forward. Why? Because the collective understood something we have forgotten. A tree doesn't stop its internal work just because the wind is cold. They were no longer walking for their own merit. They were walking for the very idea that human warmth, the heat generated by a shared purpose, can outlast any winter of the soul. The tension reached a terrifying snapping point when the elements finally took a toll on the smallest, most beloved member of the Sangha. Aloka the peace dog, the tireless bridge, began to limp. The jagged ice of the highway had cut deep into her paws, and the sub-zero temperatures threatened to shut down her small, exhausted frame. The group stopped. The silence that had spanned hundreds of miles and multiple states suddenly grew heavy, almost suffocating. It was the silence of a forest right before a massive tree falls. It was here, in the frozen heart of the storm, that the lead monk finally reached for the alms bowl he had carried since the first dusty mile in Texas. He uncovered it. The crowd of locals that had gathered held their breath. There was no gold inside, no ancient diamond, no secret relic of power. Instead, he pulled out a simple, tattered piece of cloth, a fragment of an old robe from a teacher long past, and a small, humble jar of medicinal oil. This was the resolution of the mystery loop, the realization that we carry the tools for healing within us all along, but they are only revealed in our moments of greatest, most naked vulnerability. The monks didn't just tend to Aloka. They tended to each other with a tenderness that defied the cold. They shared the oil. They wrapped the cloth around the dog's wounded paws. And as they did, something truly miraculous happened. The local people, who had been watching from the warmth of their homes, didn't stay behind their glass anymore. They were grafted into the story. They came out into the freezing wind. They brought heavy wool blankets, not for the monk's shoulders, but to wrap specifically around the dog. They brought pots of warm water to wash the road grit and ice from the monk's bleeding feet. In that frozen, a crystalline moment, the mystery of the bowl was fully resolved. It wasn't meant to be full of wealth. It was meant to be an empty vessel, an invitation for others to find their own capacity to give. Tears blurred the eyes of the hardened onlookers. The healing wasn't a miracle of modern medicine. It was the biological miracle of a community grafting itself onto a group of strangers in the middle of a blizzard. The noise of the world was finally, utterly silenced by the roar of human kindness. The 2,300-mile journey finally drew to a symbolic close as the group neared the monuments of Washington, D.C. But for the collective, the finish line was never the point. In the world of forestry, the success of a migrating species isn't measured by the coordinate where the trees end up, but by how they fundamentally changed the chemical composition of the soil where they stood along the way. These 19 monks and one dog proved that peace is not a passive state. It is not the mere absence of noise. Peace is a presence. It is a presence so steady, so rooted, and so rhythmic that the noise of hate and division simply can no longer find the nutrients it needs to thrive. What did those millions of agonizing steps through the Texas heat, the Dayton blood, and the Carolina snow actually prove? They proved that we, as a society, have been looking at the concept of roots all wrong. We have been taught that roots are something that tie us to a single piece of property, a specific zip code, or a narrow, rigid identity. But the walk for peace demonstrated a radical, organic truth that challenges our very foundation. Home is not a place. Home is a shared rhythm. You are never truly uprooted, no matter how far you travel or how much you lose, as long as you are walking in the company of love. The monks showed a deeply divided nation that you do not need to agree with someone's theology, their politics, or their background to walk peacefully beside them for 10 miles. They didn't preach a single sermon. They simply existed in the same space. They were a living, breathing metaphor for healing, showing that even when a branch is struck by a vehicle or a paw is sliced by the ice, the entire organism survives by redistributing its internal strength to the point of pain. In our modern world, which preaches the gospel of every man for himself, this act of collective survival is the most revolutionary, a most punk rock act imaginable. They didn't just walk across the geography of America. They planted a permanent seed in the collective psyche of everyone who saw them, a seed that suggests we are not separate weeds competing for sun, but part of the same vast, moving forest. As the saffron robes finally come to a rest, and the long, heavy silence of the open road fades into the dusty archives of history, the echo of the walk for peace remains vibrant in the air. The journey of the 19 monks and Aloka the peace dog was not a performance for the cameras. It was a mirror held up to our own souls. It asks us a difficult, haunting question. Who are you walking with? Whose roots are entwined with yours when the winter storm finally rolls in? Whose pain do you feel as if it were your own? Healing does not happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen in the isolation of a glowing screen or the safety of a locked room. It happens when we allow ourselves to be grafted onto the messy, beautiful, painful lives of others. It happens when we realize that the stranger walking on the shoulder of the highway is not a threat, but a limb of the very same tree we belong to. The long road from the heart of Texas to the steps of the Capitol is now just a stretch of asphalt again, filled with the usual noise of commerce and travel. But for those who saw the golden line of the 19, the ground itself feels different now. It feels fertile. It feels like a place where, if we are brave enough to stay silent and keep walking, peace might finally take hold and grow. So, as you step back into the noise of the world, as you face the gears of the machine once more, take a moment to find your own internal silence. Look for your own sangha, your own grove of support, and always remember the lesson of the barefoot men in the snow. You are never truly lost as long as you are moving with compassion, because in the end, we aren't just walking through the wind. We are the roots that hold the entire world together. We are the healing the earth has been waiting for.